of Diddy, Alex Fine could no longer hold it in. In a flash, he burst from the gallery like a storm made flesh, knocking over the defense attorney, tossing aside court officers, and roaring, "What did you do to my wife? You need to disappear, you monster." What did Cassie say? What could be so horrifying that it made a man, a normally composed fitness trainer, lose all control and charge into a courtroom like a living hurricane? What happened behind the golden bedroom doors that once belonged to Diddy's private kingdom? If it was merely a broken relationship, a bitter breakup, could it have turned into a testimony this explosive? Discover everything in the video that follows. The unexpected courtroom attack on the 9th day in the Manhattan courtroom. Cassie had just finished her nearly 4-hour testimony. Pregnant and visibly exhausted, she stood there on the witness stand, no longer a billboard-charting pop singer but a living witness, a shattered mirror reflecting the depravity Sean Diddy Combs had inflicted on her body and soul. She kept her head bowed, as if she had just broken free from an invisible chain that had been choking her for a decade. Suddenly, the courtroom silence was cut by the sharp screech of a chair dragging across the floor, startling everyone. Alex Fine, Cass's husband, stood up from the public gallery, his face flushed red, fists clenched so tight the veins bulged on his knuckles. Gone was the usual calm of the fitness coach. His face twisted in rage, eyes bloodshot like a cornered animal. In an instant, he lunged toward the defendant's table where Diddy sat in silence. "What did you do to my wife?" The scream tore through the room like a bullet straight through the chest of the courtroom. "You deserve to die, you monster." The microphone on the witness table shrieked as Alex slammed into it, his right hand launching a punch through the air aimed directly at the face the press had once called a hip-hop icon. A defense attorney tried to block his path but was shoved aside, sliding like a sandbag across the tiled floor. A court officer rushed in only to be thrown back, his shoulder ripped, belt askew. "I heard everything, every single word." Alex shouted as he nearly reached Diddy. "You made her describe it all. You made my wife sit in that filth and asked her if she enjoyed it. Are you even human?" One hand nearly brushed Diddy's shoulder before 3 officers simultaneously tackled him. Alex thrashed, legs kicking wildly, eyes blazing, still shouting, "You sit there like a king. Who do you think you are, Sean? You should be tied to a stake. You should kneel and look every woman you hurt in the eyes. You used power to humiliate her. She was only 19 when you dragged her into the dark. You're not a father. You're not even a man. You're filth." Alex screamed as he was pinned to the floor, hands cuffed, blood seeping from his wrists where the metal bit into his skin. Diddy stepped back 2 paces, face pale, shielding half his face like he expected to be struck. He said nothing. His eyes bulged like a dead fish, mouth agape, a far cry from the man who once sat front row at the Met Gala, shook hands with presidents, and laughed aboard million-dollar yachts. Now, Diddy was just a shriveled, trembling figure, cornered by the righteous fury of a husband. 4 officers finally subdued Alex. He was held down, wrists cuffed behind his back, but still struggled, choking out words. "I had to hear every word my wife said. Do you understand what she endured? What this bastard did to her? I couldn't just sit there." His voice cracked, not from weakness but from a heart exploding between justice and love. On the witness stand, Cassie raised a hand to her mouth, not to stop the tears but to hold in the scream rising from her chest. The pain she thought she had learned to bear now erupted in a new form when the only man who ever loved her unconditionally became a secondary victim of the same monster. Judge Aaron Subramanian slammed his gavel 3 times, each crack sharp as a starter pistol. "Court is in recess," he declared, voice grinding like metal. "Remove the defendant to a private chamber. Witness to the waiting room. And anyone in the gallery who cannot remain calm, step outside and do not return. This is a courtroom, not a gladiator arena." His voice wasn't loud, but it landed like a sentence. Diddy was escorted out through the back exit. The hallway lights cast a sickly glow on his face, highlighting beads of sweat rolling down his neck. Gone was the swagger of a hip-hop king. Gone was the smirk. All that remained was the fallen shadow of a man, a symbol unraveling before the very eyes that once worshipped him. The next day, every front page carried the photo of Alex Fine being dragged from the courtroom by police. But the public didn't condemn him. On the contrary, he was hailed as the last man willing to lose his mind for justice. The hashtag #JusticeForCassie trended across Twitter and Instagram. Hundreds of thousands shared that moment, not just for its drama, but because they saw themselves in that rage. No one wants to live in a world where good people stay silent. So what did Cassie endure? What could she possibly have said that so transformed a calm man like Alex Fine into a roaring tempest in open court? Testimony filled with blood and tears. When the trial truly began, the prosecution quickly focused all their efforts on the testimony of key witnesses, especially Cassandra Cassie Ventura, Diddy's ex-girlfriend and one of the alleged victims. Ventura, then 8.5 months pregnant, appeared before the jury looking weary but resilient. The woman who had once been a beauty icon of 2000s R&B was no longer anyone's doll. "I'm here to tell what he did," she said, her voice steel-hard, resolute, unmasked and unflinching, not for pity, but to end a hellish cycle that lasted 11 years. She began with her 21st birthday night in Las Vegas, where everything seemed like a fairy tale, a luxury hotel, unlimited champagne, a guest list full of celebrities. But the fairy tale quickly turned into a horror film when Diddy, then nearly 40, powerful, wealthy, and scheming, dragged her out to the balcony, kissed her without asking a word. I didn't have time to agree or refuse. He just did everything, then went back to the party as if I were just a cocktail he had just sampled. From that moment, Cass's life entered a new chapter, one without freedom. She detailed how Diddy controlled everything, who she met, what she wore, even whether she could sleep peacefully. He installed cameras in the house. Every corner, I could see red blinking lights, even when I brushed my teeth. Once, when she went out with an old classmate, she came home only to be locked in a room for 24 hours. No phone, no food, just white walls and the silence of the punished. Cassie did not just recount. She reenacted, in a direct, straightforward manner. No beating around the bush about the freak-offs, nights, the sick performances Diddy staged, hiring bodyguards, dancers, even male escorts to force her to have sex in front of him. He called it art. But to me, it was organized rape. Once, after she screamed refusing to participate, Diddy threw a phone at her face, tearing her right cheek. The next day, he took her shopping for a Hermes bag to make up. Every time she had a chance to shine, like releasing the single official girl, Diddy tried to overshadow her, cancelling shows, spreading rumors she used drugs, threatening the record label to stop promotion. I'm not afraid of failure. I'm afraid of success. Because every time I take one step forward, he pushes me 3 steps back, Cassie emphasized, eyes blazing. If a man fears your light, the first thing he does is cover that light with his own shadow. She did not forget to mention the Kid Cudi case, a brief relationship Diddy saw as betrayal. 3 days after learning about it, Cudi's car exploded in front of his house. Diddy looked at me, winked, and said, "I told you so." I wasn't bluffing. She believed him, not because he convinced her, but because he once threw someone down the stairs just for looking at her too long. The courtroom fell silent. Only the shaky pen of a journalist scratching on white paper. Cassie told of the time she ran away from home, hiding in a hotel with her mother. But Diddy found her, came all the way there, wept, knelt, promised, then that night slammed her head against the wall for making him ashamed in front of the bodyguards. She didn't know whether to believe the tears or the blood on the floor. I stayed not because I was stupid, but because I was imprisoned, by fear, by finances, by reputation, and by secret tapes. Before concluding, Cassie looked straight at Diddy, sitting just a few meters away wearing dark glasses, expressionless. Then she turned to the jury. I was his muse, yes. But I'm not the muse of a love story. I am a living witness of an 11-year torture film. And if justice is real, today will be the ending of that film. Her voice did not tremble. Only Diddy slightly bowed his head, unclear whether from shame or fear of the sharp blade named truth. The courtroom had become a crucible of revelations, a place where secrets long buried were being unearthed in real time, sending shockwaves through the entertainment world and beyond. As the trial progressed, each new testimony painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Sean Diddy Combs, not just as a mogul and musical genius, but as a man who, according to multiple accusers, used his power and influence to manipulate, control, and destroy. By the third week, the witness stand became a revolving door for individuals whose names had once graced red carpets and platinum album liner notes. One such figure was former Bad Boy Records executive Lawrence L.B. Bishop. With trembling hands and a heavy voice, Bishop recounted behind-the-scenes meetings where Diddy would allegedly boast about his ability to control lives. It was like he thought he was untouchable, Bishop told the court, staring down at his shoes. He'd say things like, "I made them, I can break them." At the time, I thought it was just ego. Now I see it was something else. Other former employees began corroborating these characterizations, their stories eerily consistent despite having worked with Diddy at different points in his career. An anonymous female assistant described being ordered to procure women for Diddy's private gatherings, some of whom were paid, while others were allegedly coerced or misled. She claimed that refusal to follow his instructions could result in sudden termination or worse, public humiliation and blacklisting in the industry. "You don't say no to him," she testified. "You just don't." The most damning testimony yet came from a former security contractor, employed during the late 2000s when Diddy was at the peak of his influence. This man, whose identity was protected due to fear of reprisal, alleged that he had witnessed more than one incident of violence inside Diddy's private residences. "There were parties where everything looked normal from the outside," he said, voice distorted through a digital filter for anonymity. "But behind the closed doors, there were screams, there were fights. I saw bruises. I saw women leave in tears." He added that he was paid generously to keep quiet, with additional non-disclosure agreements signed under duress. Court records showed that these non-disclosure agreements had been part of a broader strategy to contain scandal. Several victims came forward stating that they were pressured, sometimes with threats of physical harm, other times with promises of financial reward, to sign NDAs that prohibited them from speaking publicly about their encounters with Diddy. In some cases, victims alleged that even after signing, they were monitored or followed, an intimidation tactic designed to enforce silence. Then came the financial experts, auditors, former business managers, and forensic accountants, who exposed a network of payments flowing from Diddy's shell corporations to private accounts in the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, and Asia. Prosecutors alleged that these accounts were used to funnel hush money, pay off potential whistleblowers, and in one instance, fund private intelligence operatives who monitored the movements of former employees and partners. The magnitude of the alleged operation was staggering, prompting comparisons to international criminal enterprises rather than the typical white-collar crimes seen in celebrity circles. The most dramatic moment came when a surprise witness, an artist who once publicly feuded with Diddy, stepped into the courtroom. Known only as Zed, he described a volatile history with the mogul. He alleged that after refusing to sign with Bad Boy Records, he was systematically targeted, his concerts cancelled without explanation, collaborators warned against working with him, and digital campaigns launched to discredit him. "I didn't just lose a deal. I lost my entire career," he said. "And I have every reason to believe that was Sean's doing." Adding to the mountain of evidence were detailed psychological evaluations submitted by licensed therapists, who had counseled some of the alleged victims. Without revealing patient identities, the therapists described patterns consistent with long-term trauma, PTSD, and emotional abuse. Several victims reportedly experienced recurring nightmares, anxiety attacks, and deep-seated fear of retaliation. The mental scars, according to the therapists, were profound and enduring. As media coverage intensified, major networks began airing nightly specials dissecting the case. Legal analysts debated the strength of the evidence, the credibility of witnesses, and the likelihood of a conviction. Some drew parallels to the Harvey Weinstein trial, noting how the entertainment industry was once again forced to confront its culture of silence and complicity. Public opinion started to shift decisively. Social media, once divided on Diddy's innocence, now pulsed with hashtags like #survivors of Combs and #justice for Cassie, the latter referencing Diddy's former partner who had already settled a civil case against him. Meanwhile, the defense attempted to discredit witnesses, casting them as disgruntled former employees or opportunists seeking money and fame. Diddy's lead attorney, Martin Fields, maintained his client's innocence, arguing that the case was a grotesque pile of coincidences, lies, and fame-hungry betrayal. He cited the lack of direct physical evidence in many of the abuse claims and pointed to inconsistencies in a handful of testimonies. However, Fields' arguments struggled to gain traction amid the emotionally powerful accounts pouring in daily. Outside the courtroom, protesters gathered. Some held signs supporting the accusers, chanting slogans like "No more silence" and "Believe survivors." Others, albeit in smaller numbers, still rallied behind Diddy, calling for due process and expressing skepticism about the motives behind the accusations. The scene was often chaotic, with heated exchanges erupting between opposing sides. Police presence grew, and barricades were installed to maintain order. Then, on a fateful Thursday, prosecutors introduced video footage recovered from a digital forensics expert who had managed to retrieve corrupted data from a former security camera system in one of Diddy's now-abandoned properties. Though grainy and time-stamped from nearly a decade ago, the video showed a private party where a visibly intoxicated young woman was being led away by two bodyguards, while Diddy appeared to signal something to them. The context was unclear, but the implications were dark. The courtroom fell silent as the video played. One juror reportedly wept. As the prosecution rested its case, the narrative was clear. This was not a story of isolated incidents, but a systematic abuse of power executed over years, possibly decades. The web of allegations, ranging from emotional manipulation and physical abuse to financial intimidation and digital surveillance, pointed to an orchestrated culture of fear and control. Prosecutor Linda Merriweather summarized it best in her closing statement: "This is not just a fall from grace. It's a revelation of who Sean Combs really was behind the veil of fame, a man who believed he was above the law, above humanity, and above consequences." The defense's case, in contrast, was minimal. Diddy himself, though urged by many to testify, declined to take the stand, citing his Fifth Amendment right. His legal team focused on procedural objections and technicalities, challenging the admissibility of certain testimonies and evidence. They brought in a handful of character witnesses, former collaborators who spoke to Diddy's generosity and mentorship, but the contrast between these polished anecdotes and the visceral trauma described by accusers was stark. As the jury began deliberations, speculation mounted across media outlets. Opinion polls showed an overwhelming majority of the public believed Diddy was guilty, though legal experts warned that public sentiment doesn't determine verdicts. Still, in the court of public opinion, a conviction had already been rendered. Brand partnerships dissolved overnight. Music streaming platforms quietly removed Diddy's tracks from featured playlists. Industry colleagues distanced themselves. One prominent rapper tweeted, "The truth always surfaces. Ain't nobody untouchable." Meanwhile, more lawsuits loomed. Civil cases began piling up, some involving allegations similar to those in the criminal trial, others involving breach of contract, unpaid royalties, and retaliatory business practices. One case, filed by a former talent manager, alleged that Diddy had orchestrated smear campaigns and sabotage when the manager refused to comply with unethical demands. Another involved a former live-in housekeeper who claimed she was subjected to verbal abuse and unsafe working conditions, with no recourse due to NDA restrictions. In the wake of these revelations, calls for broader industry reform intensified. Advocates pushed for mandatory HR departments within record labels, independent ombudsmen to oversee artist welfare, and the dissolution of long-standing NDAs that silenced victims. The conversation had outgrown Diddy. It was now about power structures in entertainment, unchecked male dominance, and the cost of fame when accountability is lacking. As closing arguments concluded and the jury withdrew to deliberate, one couldn't help but feel the weight of a moment that extended far beyond the walls of that courtroom. This was not merely a celebrity on trial. It was an industry, a culture, and an era. Whether Diddy would be convicted remained to be seen, but his legacy had already been irrevocably altered. No matter the verdict,